for being here today. As you can see, we are recording. My name is Justin Leon. I work as part of the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. I'm going to refer to that as the Learning Network moving forward. But just wanted to thank you all for being here. I wanted to ask that if everyone could please turn off their video so we can conserve bandwidth for those of you that may be for other people that may be calling in from the villages. I appreciate it. And so now that I've introduced myself, hi everybody, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video and start sharing my screen. All right, hopefully everybody can see that there. So just getting started again, thank you all. If you're calling in, please mute your phone. If you don't have a dedicated mute button, pressing *6 should mute your phone. If you're using your computer audio, all participants have been muted. During the Q&A session, you'll be able to unmute yourself to ask a question. You can also enter your questions into the chat and we'll read your questions out loud. Lastly, as you've already seen, this session is being recorded. We'll add this recording to the Learning Network website. We invite those of you who are able to access the chat on Zoom to introduce yourselves. Our offices are located at the International Arctic Research Center, which is located within the traditional territory of the Lower Tanana Dene people. I'm calling in today from Anchorage, Alaska, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Naina Athabascan people. So real quickly, just a little bit about the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network, the Learning Network, for those of you who may not be familiar. Our goal is to create a community of learning, sharing, and support for Alaska tribes and indigenous communities that are responding to the current and future climate impacts of climate change. There are a few ways that you can participate in the Learning Network in addition to attending information sessions like the one you're a part of now. First, we are available for monthly or as needed one-on-one check-in calls for tribes and communities that are planning or just getting started with their climate change adaptation projects. Depending on the unique concerns and priorities of your community, we'll also look for opportunities to connect you with other communities and experts that can best support your work. We will also begin hosting monthly Learning Network calls again. These calls may have different conversation topics each month. I'm sorry, if you could please mute yourselves. Thank you. These calls might also be a forum to work on different aspects of climate change adaptation plans or assessments. If you haven't already done so, please consider signing up for the Tribal Resilience e-bulletin. This is distributed approximately every 3 weeks and includes upcoming events, funding opportunities, and links to different resources that support tribal communities in climate change adaptation. The newsletter is also a great place to learn about upcoming information sessions and trainings that we'll be offering through the Learning Network. You can find information on how to participate in the Learning Network on our website. And so now an overview of today's session. So we're going to be going over the Alaska Arctic Observatory and Knowledge Hub, otherwise known as AAOKH. It's a community-based observing program that is based at the International Arctic Research Center at UAF. It's in partnership with the residents of Arctic Alaska coast communities, and regular observations highlight the changes in the seasonal cycle being experienced in Arctic Alaska. So with that, we're also going to be having a presentation of AAOKH's StoryMap, reflecting on linking local observations with climate adaptation, and then we'll finish off with a question and answer session. So I'd like to welcome our two presenters today. We have both Roberta Glenn and Donna Hauser. Thank you for being here and presenting for us today. Roberta Turok Glenn is from Utqiagvik and is a recent graduate of the Geoscience Master's Program at UAF. Roberta put the AAOKH StoryMap together as part of her thesis on documenting coastal change and community-based observations in Alaska communities. Thank you for being here today, Roberta. Also, we have Donna Hauser. She is a research assistant professor at the International Arctic Research Center at UAF, where she pursues interdisciplinary and collaborative research in marine ecology. Dr. Hauser increasingly works at the social ecological interface through partnerships with tribal organizations and indigenous coastal communities across northern Alaska, including as the science lead for AAOKH. Thank you as well for being with us today, Donna. And with that, I would like to turn it over to both of you and appreciate your time again.
Great, thank you so much. And Roberta is sharing our slides now. Thank you. So Kanukpuk, Taiku, thank you so much to the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network for hosting this presentation, and to all of you for your interest and for joining us today. So I'll just share a few slides about our program before turning over the bulk of the presentation to Roberta. So, and apologies for my dog in the background. Thanks, Roberta. Okay, so my name's Donna Hauser. My parents are Bill and Carol Hauser. They brought me to Alaska as an infant when they settled on Dena'ina land in Anchorage in the 1970s. And my love for Alaska's places and wildlife and people really blossomed through the privileges I had as a child exploring Alaska's natural places. I went away to school and was trained as a marine ecologist. Most of my work was to study marine mammals and how they responded or do respond to changes in their environment. And I was really glad to eventually make my way home to Alaska, where I'm now research assistant professor at the International Arctic Research Center at UAF. I'm grateful to live, work, and now raise my own family on the traditional and ongoing lands of the Lower Tanana Dene people. But I am joining you today from Homer, Alaska. So that's been an area stewarded by the Dena'ina, Supiaq, and Yupik peoples. So as Justin introduced a little bit, it's really been an honor and a pleasure to increasingly work with the First Peoples of Alaska as my research has grown at UAF. And increasingly, I partner with tribes and Indigenous observers from the Alaska coastal communities on the North Slope and Northwest parts of Alaska, including now serving as the science lead for the Alaska Arctic Observatory and Knowledge Hub, or AAOKH. Next slide. Okay, so let's introduce the AAOKH program, or what we refer to as AAOKH for short. AAOKH is a big project, but the key component is focused on our network of local observers from communities across the Chukchi and Beaufort coasts of northern Alaska. Local observers are leading traditional Inupiaq ways of life based on the land and the sea. And as part of AAOKH, observers are documenting on a regular basis, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, observations of their environment, observations of the ocean, of the sea ice, of weather and wind conditions, as well as fish and wildlife. AAOKH is an ongoing project, so it originally evolved out of a previous effort that was called the Seasonal Ice Zone Observing Network, or SIZONet, that started in 2006. AAOKH came online around 2015. And so we have been building on the previous observations from SIZONet. So in total, our combined data repository includes over 9,000 local observations that are stored within our archives. Next slide. And AAOKH represents a pretty diverse set of observations and observing protocols, as I mentioned on the previous slide. The cornerstone of our project really are these descriptive local observations by Inupiaq observers, which provide sustained, holistic, year-round, community-based observations. And so you can kind of see you can see a sampler of what we do in this diagram. So in addition to sort of those narrative observations that are provided by our regular observing efforts, we have several sort of special projects that address specific interests that might arise in a given community. And so, for example, those could be taking ocean measurements with a CTD instrument. We also help with mapping the sea ice trails that are used by whalers in Utqiagvik during spring whaling. And on the bottom left here, you can see our 5 current communities. They span from Kikitagrek or Kotzebue to Kaktovik, covering over 1,500 kilometers of Arctic coastline in Alaska. Next slide. Okay, so we have been doing a little bit of work with our steering group and with our observers in the past couple of years to really identify what are the priorities for AAOKH as we move forward. And so 3 themes have emerged through that process. The first is that we recognize how important it is that we have a really unique and special set of data that spans back, as I mentioned, to 2007. And so we really want to sustain our support and compensated support of our local Indigenous observers to be able to share their knowledge and document the environmental changes in their communities. That's one of our priorities. A second priority is also to create educational opportunities for the next generation of Indigenous leaders and scholars. And so I think you'll see an example of one of the ways that we've been trying to make that happen with Roberta's presentation and really sharing what she's been doing as part of her master's thesis at UAF, which AAOKH helped to support. A third priority has been really to think about how these observations can be useful and usable by people in these communities. And so providing services and information that might support local and community priorities, whether that's something like, tribal adaptation, or if that's something like co-management or other priorities that have been identified in a given community. Next slide. Okay, and I think this is my last slide. So I just wanted to highlight that this is sort of speaking to that second priority of AAOKH right now. One of the ways that we're working on engagement is to really make space. So we're trying to provide space for research and funding opportunities for UAF graduate and undergraduate Alaska Native students. Here are 3 of our current, or actually Roberta is no longer a current student. She's taking off and doing cool new things. So we've been working with Roberta Turok Glenn, Mikok Lindley, and Kimberly Kivuk Pikok. And these students have been picking up research that is of their interest in association with AAOKH and AAOKH observers. And I see them as really sort of the next generation of really great leaders and scientists in these fields. So it has just been my honor to work with Roberta over the past several years. And it's just been so exciting to see the work that she's put together for her master's thesis in association with AAOKH. And so I'm going to hand it off to Roberta next and say thank you, Roberta, for all of your great work. And let's hear what you've been up to. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Donna. Paglagipsi uvangaturok nalog mutun Roberta Glenn utkervig mugurunga akaga ikalin akpik apaga savik Glenn ilisaktunga University of Alaska Fairbanks me. Hi everyone, my name is Roberta Turok Glenn. I'm from Utkervik. My mom is Iklin Ukbik and my dad is Richard Savik Glenn, and I'm a recent graduate of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And my thesis was on documenting coastal change and community-based observations in Alaska communities. And so as part of my project, I wanted to develop relevant data products which adequately communicate and support local priorities, so the priorities of Alaska Native communities. And so I worked with AAOKH. I had the opportunity to work with AAOKH and the observers, and my deliverable for my thesis for AAOKH was to develop an online ArcGIS StoryMap. And so I wanted to start with an example of observations in the AAOKH database. This is an observation from Billy Adams in Utkervik from January 2020. Billy sends his full text observations with photos via email. And that's what's shown at the top here under transcript. What you can see down below, we've coded some of what he mentions into the database. And so here we can see he mentions activities on the sea ice. People were going hunting at this time. There's information about sea ice, including shorefast ice thickness and the presence of canoe, which is an Inupiaq sea ice term for slush ice. And then we also have weather observations, including temperature and wind. And then we also have the presence of wildlife. In this case, it looks like folks were hunting on the ice. They caught a bearded seal or ugruk. And you can see the photo attached down here. So this is the kind of information that can be found in some of the AAOKH observations. And I just wanted to start out with an example of one right from the database. And so I also wanted to briefly cover some of the how and why of my AAOKH project. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the AAOKH observations or how I would go about trying to synthesize what the observers are seeing. I wanted to focus on local concerns and priorities. What are people worried about? And so I took my direction from the annual AAOKH steering group meeting, where observers reflect on some of the recent changes that they've observed over the last 1 year. And what I heard from them were specific changes that were impacting three things: subsistence activities, travel access, and community infrastructure. And so from there, I set out to identify any observations that that describe these conditions that lead to these local impacts. And so I followed up with one-on-one conversations with some of the observers, which I recorded with their permission. And I compiled some supporting instrumental data to also include alongside these local observations. I chose to do it this way to use data and observations from multiple knowledge systems and perspectives, because I wanted to be able to communicate a story, not just data, but a story, a narrative of Arctic coastal change from the perspective of the people who have been living and thriving there for millennia. I wanted the outside world to hear directly from Inupiaq people what's going on and how their communities are being impacted. So what do the observations say? Well, observations fall into four main themes: warmer temperatures, changing winds, coastal storms, and sea ice changes. And I'll give everyone here a little bit of a snapshot of my story map and highlight some of the key themes. And here there's a screenshot from the first page header of my story map. And I think a link was sent out before today's event. And so one of the themes was warming temperatures. 2019 was a big year. It was a warm winter, and it shows in Bobby Schaefer's observations from Kotzebue, where he describes a lack of sea ice in Kotzebue Sound. And here I include a graphic put together by Rick Toman at AAOKH showing the satellite view of Kotzebue Sound. And we'll listen to Bobby here.
The folks from the university, when they came up here to do the sea ice study, they came up here to do a study in 2019, and there was hardly any ice to study because we just didn't have any ice that year at all. We're 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and the Kotzebue Sound was ice-free for almost the whole year.
And so another theme was changing winds. And here's an example from Kaktovik where Carla Sims-Coyote describes strong winds inhibiting snow accumulation, making travel access difficult in the winter.
Our tundras have been pretty bare. We'll have a thin layer of snow out on the tundra, but we're still seeing a lot of the grass and the brush from the tundra. It's especially real bad up in the mountains for the hunters. It makes it real hard for them on machines. Sometimes makes it pretty costly for them, especially when they're going up to hunt the sheep.
And so another key theme was coastal storms, flooding, and erosion. Observers in every community have reported, in each AAOKH community, have reported coastal storm impacts. Coastal storms, flooding, and erosion impact critical community infrastructure, as well as important cultural use sites. And here Billy Adams describes erosion in recent years impacting Utqeervik.
I think the biggest concern is just like we just talked about the erosion is taking our livelihood in front of our eyes. You know, I don't like to think that way. We're still gonna be here, and we're gonna live with it and go on and living our happy lives as being there.
And so another theme was changes in sea ice conditions. Sea ice is an important platform for supporting marine mammals and subsistence activities in each community. It's also a vital platform for travel access between North Slope communities. Here, Billy Adams from Utqeervik describes sea ice changes impacting travel on the North Slope Community Winter Access Trails, or CWAT trails.
Like the Seawalk Trail, you know, that trail that goes to Barrow to Prudhoe Bay to Untitled and to Wainwright. You know, they just started that not too long ago, but the planners that who make the ice trails, you know, they really have to plan a lot sooner. Some of the freight haulers, like the local people like Kulim, Pepley, and Arnie Erie, you know, they used to go over the ocean a lot sooner, like in late in December, January. But they've been, you know, they've been hugging the coastline because the ice has been not really set in. The ice opens and closes. It makes tide cracks and those kind of things that they worry about it. I think it's happened more often now is that those more and more cracks, but they wait till January and to February where it's a little safer. So that adjustment has shifted a lot for the traveler, but a lot of people are very happy about being able to get groceries from Barrow or from driving to Fairbanks, and now it's
and so another section in my story map that I haven't mentioned yet is this one on subsistence change. Observers in each community report changes to their subsistence calendars. They need to go out earlier. Each year there's strong variation in year-to-year conditions, and all of these impact their subsistence activities. However, the observation shown here from Bobby Schaefer, it doesn't communicate those changes. I received feedback on my story map from Billy Adams. He told me to include something positive, to reiterate that despite these rapid environmental changes, that communities are still able to go out and harvest animals. And so I included this observation here from Bobby Schaefer, describing plentiful caribou, fish, and herring around Kotzebue. And I'll play a clip from Bobby where he talks a little bit more about subsistence change.
We used to get caribou almost like clockwork in August, late August, early September, coming through and migrating south. And this year, we got them in November. The conditions out there were just too warm for them to go south. The waterfowl, they're starting to nest a month earlier than they normally nest. You know, so they're in a state of confusion as well. But we're so used to the norm that when something like this happens, the animals have to evolve and adjust.
And so to conclude, I think that the most valuable thing that we have going for us at AAOKH right now is the successful partnerships with each of the observers and the communities that we work with. And with the direction that AAOKH is going in, I think that we're going to be looking more at how we can address community priorities, AAOKH community priorities. And with a growing database and recent expansion into other communities, we can start thinking about how this kind of effort can inform climate adaptation planning. Local observations give us insight into local impacts, and documentation of these observations can give us a baseline from which to measure future change. Through AAOKH, we can track these changes in the environment, which are important to Arctic communities. These observations can inform things like wildlife co-management strategies, hazard mitigation planning, and in particular, we can learn more about subsistence impacts at the local level. And with that, if you want to learn more, I have my email as well as Donna's emails listed here. The AAOKH website, arcticaok.org, or you can check out the AAOKH Facebook page, which is where we share regularly the observations and other data related to AAOKH communities. But with that, Koyunakbuk, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us here this morning and listen to a little bit about AAOKH.
All right, thank you so much, Roberta, and Donna as well. I think really appreciate that, and if we can do a little bit of question and answer now, that would be great. If anyone is on the phone, maybe we'll start there, and then if people would like to raise their hand through the Zoom, if you've got access to a computer. But first, is there anybody on the phone line that has any questions? All right, let's see. Well, now we will start with online. Does anybody have a question? If you could please raise your hand. Let's see if I can. Robert, would you mind not sharing your screen? I think well, no, maybe that's me. Okay, just want to make sure. Gotcha. Okay, can see everybody there. Okay, anybody have a question?
Justin, Molly put a question in the chat from Martha J. Huber. If you want to go ahead and read that one out.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Krista. Yes, so thank you, Molly. From Martha J. Hoover. Let's see. How current are these observations able to be seen by locals? Can people use the data immediately?
So the observations are shared regularly through the AAOKH Facebook page. I do believe there is guest access to the AAOKH database, and that comes with its own user agreement, but there is access, and we do share recent observations through the Facebook page. I don't know if Donna wants to say anything more.
Yeah, we, as Roberta was saying, that's exactly right. So not every single observation goes on Facebook, but often, recent, within the last week types of observations are often posted there. And then we do have an online database that essentially has a data use agreement that so anybody who wants to look at it, they have to agree to that data use agreement, and then they get limited access. So there are certain protections that we put on the access to some of the observation information, but you can see the pictures, you can see the text usually of all of the observations there. And so I'll go ahead and put that in the chat for folks that want to explore that a little bit as well. But I'll also mention that that's an area that we're pretty actively working on right now. And I think we'll be seeing some improvements and changes going forward. And we're sort of working directly with each of our observers as well to think about, should there be any changes to our data use agreement, how do they want the data to be accessed and available and be used? And so making that balance for, making data available for use in a local community and by people who are in the community. I think one of the things that's been, what I've noticed when we make some of the observations, put them on Facebook, is that's actually one of the best ways that we fulfill our knowledge hub sort of role, where there's actually is some exchange. I'll just give you an example of a few years ago, Billy Adams and Ityagvik harvested an ugruk, a bearded seal, that had a thick yellow coloration to its blubber. And so when we posted that picture, he had noticed, he had commented that was unusual. And he was concerned whether it was even safe to eat, because that was something that he hadn't seen before. And through the comments on Facebook. So for one, that was one of our most sort of like commented on, and you know, people had the most to say about that post. We saw that like folks that live in the Bering Sea region, they're like, oh, well, that's actually a delicacy in our area, you know, like, so there was just a really interesting exchange of information that's able to happen when we have it on Facebook. And, you know, Facebook in coastal Alaska and in rural Alaska is still pretty heavily relied on for communication. And so we see it as a pretty important tool for connecting with people in the communities. So nice. That was a long answer, but hopefully helpful.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you both. Next, we've got, I apologize if I mispronounce this, Ketunak Benjamin Charles raised his hand with a question, and then we've got something in the chat after that. Go ahead.
Rihanna, nice to see you virtually. Being at Ketunago with Circumpolar Council Alaska. Very beautiful presentation, very beautiful work, very meaningful work, and uniquely Inuit, rooted in Indigenous knowledge. I have a question in regards to your individual perspective of where you see your work moving forward in regards to the equitable and ethical co-production of knowledge, or the future co-production of knowledge. How do you envision working with Inuit and Inuit working together with researchers, scientists, policymakers, and decision makers in applying the StoryMap in finding solutions for the Arctic? And thank you again for allowing me to ask this question.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I also saw myself as someone in a unique position to be able to tell a story from my perspective as being from the North Slope, but also as, you know, as an Indigenous student in academia. And so that's my goal. That's what is driving me today, is to start to elevate Indigenous perspectives and voices in these spaces, so that this perspective is more widely known, so that people can know more about how we feel and what we think about the changes that are going on in Arctic communities. And so I just see, I mean, for me personally, my passion maybe is to continue to elevate these voices and perspectives in this academic space, in this science space, so that other people can begin to grasp the nuances and complexities of what it means to be living in a changing Arctic.
All right, great answer. Okay, thank you. So next we have Finn Danielson. He says, thank you for great and very inspiring presentations. The changes you highlight are mainly physical. Can you share with us a few words about the changes the local experts have recorded in the status, health, or taste of wildlife and fish?
Yeah, I think that the point that Donna just brought up earlier, it was a great point. Observers like Billy Adams, they do send in observations related to their harvest, to their subsistence catch, and they do identify from time to time, you know, weird or different things that they wouldn't have expected to find. I know that on the North Slope, and at least in Utqagvik, hunters work closely with the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife Management, where they communicate with them when they have a seal or a tutu, or they find something in the bowhead whale that's a little bit off or a little bit different. And AAOKH does work closely with the Wildlife Management Department, but but this was, you know, highlighting changes in the wildlife and fish. It wasn't a focus of my StoryMap project, but it is something that that is being captured and being described in observations from from the AAOKH observers. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if Donna, if you wanted to add any more to that, or yeah, thanks.
You got it.
All right, awesome. So next we have here, let's see, thank you again, Molly, from the chat, from Jennifer Braveboy on Facebook. Thank you for doing this. Do you share data with federal agencies? I am curious because I interned with NOAA and was building an ecosystem model that shows connections between scientific papers and TEK. I want to continue just because it's interesting and necessary for Indigenous folks to take control of our own research. My internship has ended.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to speak to sharing data with federal agencies. Maybe Donna, you can speak to that.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks for that question, and I think it raises a really interesting and important connection that can be made, and we're trying to work to make stronger connections to federal agencies where these observations are relevant, in particular to things like co-management. And so so far, some of the ways that we've been trying to make those connections are through the Alaska co-management organizations that manage marine mammals. So things like making presentations at those co-management meetings and talking about how we can specifically moving forward potentially collect data that I think is along the lines of exactly what Finn Danielson was noting in his comments, right? Like, what are some of the metrics from our Indigenous observers' perspectives of healthy ice seals, for example? And can we start documenting some of those observations in a way that can be fed into the co-management process? And it's really exciting to hear of folks like you, Jennifer, that are, have been doing this work with NOAA. I think part of it is also building the capacity of our federal agencies to work with Indigenous knowledge holders and to recognize the value and importance of that knowledge as well. And so it's pretty cool to hear that you at least had an internship opportunity to infuse some of that knowledge as well. And if you're interested in sort of thinking about how that could continue at UAF, I don't know what your current status is, but please feel free to reach out to me. There's, potentially some opportunities to work together through programs like AAOKH. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer the question.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, I see a hand. Thank you, Olivia Lee. Go ahead.
Hi, Roberta. That was great. Thank you so much for presenting. I'm sorry I missed part of it. I did manage to open a StoryMap on a mobile device, which was great to see that it also worked really nice on a mobile platform. And I'm wondering if you could give kind of your perspective on how hard it was to develop a StoryMap. This is kind of a technical, was it technically difficult to do? And is it something that you would encourage others to do in terms of using or leveraging technology to tell these very intricate and sometimes personal stories?
Hi, Olivia. Thank you. So the challenge for me in putting the StoryMap together was I wanted to use too many observations. I had maybe like double the observations that are shown on my StoryMap right now. There was so much I wanted to capture, and I had to find a way to really like hone in on what are the key points, what are the key themes, what is really, just hone in on the key themes. And so that was a big challenge, was to really cut down on the content that I wanted to use, but also it was fun. It was a fun challenge. It was fun to do. It was fun to talk with the observers and to pull together these different data types and perspectives and weave these different ways of knowing together to tell a more complete story. And so I really enjoyed it. The only challenge that I had was I wanted to share too much. And when you share too much or have too much, it might take away from the message. And so that was the challenge for me. But I mean, otherwise, I think it was the coolest part of my thesis. It was the most rewarding to be able to work with people from my region, from Utkelvik, where I grew up. And so, yeah, it was just really rewarding, but also a fun challenge.
So maybe I'll jump in here real quick to just point out that this story map was actually one chapter or one section of Roberta's thesis. She also worked with coastal communities in Bristol Bay region in Southwest Alaska. And so I don't know, Roberta, is your thesis going to be available online, or your thesis defense recorded and available for folks to view if they want to learn more just in general about your research?
Yeah, I think that my thesis is available online on ProQuest as of this week. So yeah, it is available if anyone would like to learn more. Unfortunately, my defense was not recorded, but there are other, you can find out more about some of that work if you do a quick search. but yeah, yes, thank you.
All right, great. And then I see Katunak Benjamin Charles has another question. Got your hand raised? Go ahead.
Thank you again for allowing us to have the space to ask questions for Roberta Tukok. A follow-up to Olivia's question, I had a thought on did you have any issues with Indigenous knowledge holders providing their Indigenous knowledge and perspectives that are equitable to science and equal footing, and providing the information or those observations? Were there any barriers such as technology? I know you said you had multiple observations come to you, but were there any barriers that the observers had in providing that information?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katunak. Thank you. Over the last 3 years, COVID has been going on, and that's been a big hindrance in being able to engage with the AAOKH observers face to face. We have been able to hold Zoom meetings, and I've been able to speak on the phone with Bobby Schaefer and Billy Adams and Stephen Potkotuk at least, AAOKH has a great relationship with the observers in the communities, and so there was no barrier in terms of me coming to them or them coming to me with questions, or just discussing things, discussing some of their observing themes. There was no, my take from my conversations with the observers is that they would like their observations to be shared. They want this to be known. They want to share their perspectives with the outside world. They want people to know what's going on. And so I was very lucky to have such willing participants for my project, for my thesis, to be able to talk to them, and we talked for hours. And so there was not necessarily a hindrance, but technologically, of course, there was some struggles in trying to effectively connect and engage with the observers. But I mean, besides the technological things, no, everything went smoothly. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And yeah, I'm just seeing we've got a couple comments, just people thanking you for the presentation. We've got specifically thanking you for answers to your questions. I've got, in case people can't see, Finn says, thanks for the excellent answers. And it looks like him and Donna have been in contact as far as potentially using story mapping using forward for work that he's got, which is great. We've got Jennifer Brave Boy on Facebook says that she's on her iPad and it's not allowing her to raise her hand or talk. So sorry, but let's see. Definitely interested in doing this for future work and the indigenizing knowledge, as so much research is being done on our land and the CPK isn't being utilized like it should. I would love to see your thesis and research work. So great to see other Indigenous folks in science. Yeah, we've got, oh, one other question just popped in. Let's see. Have any of the observers or other members of the communities expressed interest in additional monitoring methods? That's from Bonnie Murray.
Yeah, this is one of the, this is something that I talked about with Bobby Schaefer in our conversation. He brought up a good point that the changes that are being seen in each of the AAOKH communities and the impacts they have to the people in those communities, those are going to be different in each community. And so one of the things that Bobby Schaefer from Kotzebue brought up was making sure to be aware that that these changes are region specific and community specific, and these impacts are region and community specific. And so, he kind of spoke to maybe embedding that context in documenting the observations. Donna, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. Bobby has mentioned those types of comments multiple times. And I think it's a reflection of, because Kotzebue is very different than a place like AAOKH in terms of, even the species that are of most interest for harvesting and the timing, the seasonality, all of those kinds of things. And Bonnie, just to follow up on your question a little bit more, some of the things, so that we are responding to specific interests in communities also in terms of so we have handheld CTD instruments that have particularly been used in just a few of the communities, not all of the communities, or sometimes an opportunity pops up where we can help, a tribe. So one example is the native village of Diomede actually received a BIA grant to do monitoring related to HABs, harmful algal blooms. And so we contributed a CTD, sort of a in-kind contribution and support, and have been doing some data support for that effort as well. So that's just an example. We've been doing long-term mapping of the sea ice trails that are used for snow machines that are used by whalers in AAOKH. That's a project that actually started with SIZONET, Seasonal Ice Zone Observing Network, the predecessor to AAOKH. And we've been able to maintain and have plans to continue maintaining. So yeah, does that help answer your question? I see you have your hand raised.
It does. Yeah, thank you. And first of all, it's just so good to see you, Donna and Roberta. It's been many years, but it's wonderful to be connected, at least through the internet. And I was thinking back specifically to, I believe it was conversations we had at one of the AAOKH meetings about the possibility of satellite observations. And kind of in my mind, it's like a zoom in and zoom out. These observations are from the ground, so they're zoomed in. And then comparing that, or I don't know if comparing is the right word, but also looking at change over time from a satellite view and that kind of picture. So that's kind of where my thoughts were, and wondering if that had been a continued discussion.
You want me to go for that, Roberta? So we are often, one of the things that we often also post on Facebook is actually satellite imagery. And that's kind of one of the things that in particular during the transition times, right? So freeze up and break up and with the sea ice, right? And And so that's definitely something that has been of interest. And one of the things that we've actually have a proposal right now to sort of broaden some of the work that we've been doing in Utqiagvik with trail mapping is to actually create sort of a clearinghouse website. From what we've heard in people, from people in communities is like, they, will post one satellite image on Facebook for, let's say, the Kotzebue region, and then we'll get a question from somebody else like, hey, what's it look like in Kaktovik or wherever, and so sometimes I think it's hard for people to know where to go to get some of these different information. And so one thought that we had, at least for the Utqiagvik region, is that now there's a sea ice radar that UAF is maintaining. There's the trail maps, there's satellite imagery. Can we put that all at least in one place for this one community at least, so that they know where to go to look to find the most recent information, and also put the AAOKH observations there too. So it's sort of maybe a bit of a pilot study for that community, but one step in that direction. But I would welcome, further feedback and conversations with you, Bonnie, to think about how NASA might be interested in partnering with a program like AAOKH, and how we can get NASA products into the hands of people and communities a little bit more smoothly, if that's something of interest.
Yeah, and help the NASA researchers to better understand what's actually happening on the ground, because all they have is that satellite view, and neither one, that's not a good view in exclusively either. Roberta, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for this presentation and opportunity to talk.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. I think Donna did a good job. Thanks, Donna. It's good to see you, Bonnie.
All right, great. We do have a comment here from Martha J. Hoover Sanungatuk on Facebook. God forbid, but your research would be very vital if oil companies were drilling for oil on a larger scale and there was an oil spill like in Prince William Sound, where I lived in 1989. I don't know if anybody has anything to that comment, but wanted to throw that out there. Okay, and we are looking good as far as taking maybe one other question, maybe two, before we wrap up here. Does anybody have anything? Okay, well, I've got a question real quick for Roberta. Just curious, I know at the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that you have since graduated and you're moving on to other things. I was just curious what your current work situation looks like, what if it's working off of what you've already done in graduate school, and just curious.
Yeah, that is what I'm thinking about right now too. I'm hoping to continue to work in this realm, with Alaska Native communities and research in Alaska. But right now, I am hoping to hear back from a job that I have applied for, and so I'm hoping to continue to work at UAF. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Good to know. And yeah, look forward to hoping to continue to hear from you on your work endeavors, and continuing to work at UAF. And as far as the program works and your work within AAOKH and AAOKH in general, it's been around and continued to grow. And this is for both you, Roberta, and Donna. What do you guys hope to see, for instance, maybe in the next even couple years or so with increases in technology? I know you're working with GIS some. Kind of a loaded question, but just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been so special for me to work with AAOKH and to, not only work with AAOKH, but, with communities from my region, but to work with an organization that is co-led by Indigenous people. It's just been so rewarding. And I see, for the next steps of AAOKH is more focused efforts on trying to identify community needs and priorities, and making an effort from AAOKH's part to meet those needs. And I don't know, Donna, if you want to add anything.
I think that's exactly right. So of those three kind of priorities moving forward that I mentioned during the slides, that last one, which Roberta just mentioned, responding to local needs and climate change adaptation, co-management needs, those are the areas that I think our observers, our steering group, our science team at AAOKH we're all interested in those aspects, and it's the hardest to do. And so those are the things that we're most actively thinking about how to make a difference. And I see that being part of our future for AAOKH for sure. And I do hope that Roberta continues to be part of that transition and stuff. And so I'll just say, let's stay tuned to see what Roberta's next steps are.
I like it. Thank you both so much. And thank you again for your time today, and everyone else who's taken time to attend today. Just in closing here, I wanted just a couple more slides before we end things here. Let me share my screen to the right. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that now. We'll hit play. And we've just got a couple resources here. Again, we've got the link for the AAOKH Knowledge Hub and both the website, which has already been shared, and then the Knowledge Hub StoryMap, which I believe has been shared as well. And then more resources for community-based monitoring. We've got the Atlas of Community-Based Monitoring and Indigenous Knowledge in a Changing Arctic. And then just wanted to thank you all again. We've got contact for myself, Justin Leon, Melinda Chase, who some of you may already know, and Krista Haringa, who's been on helping us facilitate as well. And then we've got some updates as far as announcements on the right. We've got the National Tribal and Indigenous Tribal Conference that's going to be taking place at the end of this month. Myself and others from the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network will be there, but you can attend online as well. We've got a training that the Learning Network is going to be putting on in October for tribal climate adaptation. It's going to be in Fairbanks at the beginning of October. And then last, we've got that the deadline has been extended until October 14th for the Capital Project Fund. And this fund makes $167,500 available with non-competitive funds, and it's available to tribes. We've got the link to the Learning Network website below. And with that, just thank you all again. Really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Roberta and Donna, for presenting. And stay tuned again to All Good Things. And we hope to touch base and help you and work with you and put on other information sessions in the future. So thank you again, everyone. Take care and have a great rest of the day.
Yep, everyone.